How's everybody doing? Welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today, we're going to take a look at how heavily regulated is your state. Maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but I think this report you will find very insightful. And I also wanted to talk about one other thing real quick, and that is a regulation that is called Section 1071, which is part of the Dodd-Frank Act. So that kind of the overburdensome nature of regulation, I'll say it that way, kind of got me thinking about this topic this week. And I went looking and I actually found this very interesting study this is from the Mercatus Center of George Mason University. This was actually done in August of 2020. So this report is about 4 years old now, but this is called the Quantifying Regulation in U.S. States with State RegData 2.0. But before I jump into that, so what kind of got me thinking about this was, I'm going to read this to you. So the American Bankers Association and the Texas Bankers Association lost a legal challenge this week involving a new rule that will expand data reporting requirements for nearly all small business lenders in the country. The rule, known as Section 1071, for part of the Dodd-Frank Act that authorized it, requires lenders to begin reporting to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau the race, ethnicity, sex, and geography of small business borrowers, as well the outcome of loan applications and credit pricing. A judge in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas denied the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment, saying the rule may be ill-advised, but the possibility doesn't make it unlawful. The ABA issued a statement saying the plaintiffs plan to appeal to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, legal action has delayed the dates of compliance with the new rule. Larger lenders, which originated at least 2,500 covered loans in 2022 and 2023, now must comply starting July 18th, 2025. The smallest lenders covered by the rule, who issued at least 100 covered loans, must comply by October 18th, 2026. The rule will no doubt be a beast for the industry. Even the CFPB says the final rule will be the largest and most comprehensive data set in the United States on credit availability for small businesses, according to the court order. Some attorneys think the information could be used against banks in fair lending cases. Now, that's a whole different aspect, and I'll probably have to. I will do an episode on fair lending, and I'll probably come back to this when I get to that episode. So. Banks must also figure out how to comply. Unlike home mortgages, which are heavily regulated and fairly standardized, credit for small business isn't uniform. Although borrowers won't be required to give the demographic information to their lenders, the CFPB has indicated that it will consider how effective lenders are at collecting the required information. So there's a bunch of stuff to unpack with that, but I would just simply say this, that, lending to small businesses, I've been doing it for a very long time. It is not like making residential mortgages. Residential mortgage, you come in, you're like, hey, I want to buy this property. I have an agreement of sale. That's great. Let's go get an appraisal. Give us your tax returns. Give us your W-2s. Give us your bank statements. We're going to pull a credit report on you. It's pretty black and white in the sense of like, what's your credit score? Does your credit score work? Do you have a good paying job? Can we substantiate the income? Do your ratios work? Do you have the money for the down payment? Like if you check all those boxes and it's like, yeah, sure, no problem. Here's your mortgage, off you go, whatever. Small business lending it's much more in depth in certain ways. You really have to look. You really get into like I did an episode on the 5 C's of credit. You got to really examine and things may not happen in a specified period of time. Like in other words, I'll give you an example. Say I've got a small business that comes in and says, hey, I've been in business for 3 years. We're still relatively small. Maybe they're doing, $500,000 in sales, something like that. And they say we got, 5 employees. And I'm finally at the point now where it's like I made money the last year or two. I think I'm bankable. I'd like to get like a $50,000 line of credit. Okay, sure, no problem. But then you might look at the balance sheet of the company and you might say, hey, do you have these reports on inventory or accounts receivable. And then they might come back to you and say, well, I literally just got QuickBooks. I'm still setting it up. I don't have those reports yet or whatever. And then I might say, you know what, that's great. Go get those reports, come back to us, and then we'll take a look at them. And if they look okay, then we'll look at making you the loan. So then they go off, maybe they go off for a month or 2 months, and then they finally come back. Hey, I've got the reports. Here you go. We're all set to go. Oh, that's great. Looks great. You kind of verify a few things, maybe talk to their accountant a little bit, and then you're off you go, whatever. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. That's only one example. I mean, there's dozens of examples of things like that can happen where, you might say, yeah, we want to do the loan, but we got to verify something first, or something's got to get fixed, or maybe they need to upgrade something happened. So there's all these kind of things that can happen that don't make that process as cut and dry. And then the other thing there is the collecting of information. So banks are asked to collect information, and you go in, and if the consumer does not want to provide that information, they say, oh, I don't want to provide that. But it does not stop there. Okay. Then the regulator basically says, okay, well, then you just have to take it visually. So you're still collecting that information and you're still reporting it, even if the consumer basically doesn't want to, which is, I think is ridiculous. But that's where we're at. And they're basically going to do the same thing here. So whether you as a business owner want this information reported or not, the bank is basically going to be forced to collect it and report it. So like I said, that's what kind of got me thinking about regulatory burden in general. I mean, just like they said in here, that this is going to be, this is going to be a beast, for the industry to basically try to collect all this information. And it's going to create a burden. It's going to create a big burden on the industry on top of a ton of other burdens out there. So, and like I said, so that kind of got me thinking about the overall burden. And I said, I wonder if there's anything out there. And with that, I found this, the qualifying regulation in U.S. states with state RegData. So how regulated is your state? And it basically goes in here and says, regulation has traditionally been an understudied topic among economists because it is difficult to measure effectively. But measurement has started getting easier in recent years. The size, scope, and complexity of federal regulation in the United States, as well as regulation in other countries, is now better documented and, more importantly, qualified in various dimensions. However, measurement of U.S. regulation at the state level has remained elusive because comprehensive, consistent measures of state regulation are difficult to obtain across jurisdictions. Nonetheless, state regulation has the force of law, just like any other form of regulation. It restricts the activity of individuals and businesses with the same legal force as requirements in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. To gain a better understanding of the reach of state-level regulations in the United States, the Mercatus Center at George Mason University completed the first version of the State RegData project in 2019. Version 2.0 of the project, released in July of 2020, gathered and analyzed the regulation of 44 states plus the District of Columbia. Unfortunately, the regulatory codes of Alaska, Arkansas, Connecticut, Hawaii, New Jersey, and Vermont were not analyzed due to limitations on data availability. Mercatus researchers then used text analysis and machine learning algorithms to quantify how many words and regulatory restrictions each state's regulations contained, as well as to estimate which sectors and industries of the economy those regulations are likely to affect, and how complex the regulatory code of each state is. As in all RegData datasets, regulatory restrictions are a metric designed to act as a proxy for the number of prohibitions and obligations contained in regulatory text, as indicated by the number of occurrences of the words and phrases shall, must, may not, required, and prohibited in each state's regulation. And then it gets in here, the map below shows the number of regulatory restrictions by state. The text of regulations for these states was collected between March and June of 2020. And it goes on to say, basically, California has the most regulatory restrictions in its regulatory text with almost 396,000. New York is second with just under 300,000. Rounding out the top five are Ohio with approximately 274,000, Illinois with approximately 274,000, and Texas with approximately 263,000. Meanwhile, Idaho has the least restrictive regulations with fewer than 39,000 restrictions. Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota are other states with fewer than 60,000 restrictions. 16 states have fewer than 100,000 regulation restrictions in their administrative codes. Interestingly, 4 of the 6 states that saw the largest percentage reduction in regulatory restrictions between the releases of version 1.0 and version 2.0 of State RegData are states that have cited Mercatus research or used state data reg metrics to guide their red tape cutting efforts. These states are Idaho, Missouri, Kentucky, and Nebraska. These estimates are only for state level restrictions, which are an added layer on top of the words and regulatory restrictions in the CFR. As of 2019, the CFR contains nearly 103 million words and 1.08 million regulatory restrictions. Researchers are only beginning to understand the causes and effects of the federal regulatory system's massive size and dramatic growth over the past 4 decades. Now, with better data, the effects of state regulation can be studied more comprehensively as well. So, and now let's take a look at this chart here for a minute. So this is a chart of the United States, and we're looking at state level regulatory restrictions. And obviously you can see, yes, California is right there, followed pretty closely by Washington State and Oregon. And then we have, obviously, Texas has some pretty heavy regulation, Illinois, Ohio over here, and New York State, some of the worst. And again, this gets back to the point of you can kind of see like where are the demographics in the country going? Where is business? When you look at the map of the US and you go, where is business growing? Oh, it's all growing basically down here in the southeast, south central part of the country. You know, you look at Oklahoma, you look at Idaho, you look at Illinois, Missouri. You look at Georgia, you look at South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, even parts of West Virginia. I mean, this is where your growth is happening. And then you go up here to like North Dakota, South Dakota has got a lot of stuff going on here. And there's no magic. There's no magic here. Like, this is happening because the regulatory burdens are a lot less restrictive in these states. And these states are very pro-business. They're pro-business. They're like, hey, we want the business. We'll take the business. Interestingly, Texas, even though Texas has a lot of regulation, they are still have a very like pro-business atmosphere. And you've had a lot of companies that have moved from California to Texas. They've also moved to New Mexico. They've also moved. You can see how light. Look at Arizona compared to California. Look at Nevada compared to California. I mean, it's like there's no magic here. Like, people are going to go where it's less restrictive on them and they can operate a business more profitably. Like, that's just simple economics, simple mathematics, really. And again, I mean, you could just see, I mean, this is why California is killing itself. I mean, California is such a wonderful state, such a beautiful state. But yet, as far as like, you can't be more anti-business than California is. You can't be more restrictive than California is. I mean, it's completely over the top. I mean, the state's got a $32 billion deficit. I mean, the state's completely broke. And it's a travesty because the economy of California is massive. California by itself has an economy that's larger than most countries in the world. I mean, it's incredible. But that being said, it's a mess. It's a mess. New York, another side. I don't need to tell you politically who controls these states. We all know that. We all know that. So you can kind of figure that piece of it out for yourself. But like I said, I just wanted to reach out. Now real quickly, let's just look at PA, for example, because that's my home states where I'm at. With more than 64,000 regulatory restrictions on the books, the Commonwealth focuses more on areas like environmental protection, culture, and the arts and administration than other states, but much less in areas like health services and banking, insurance, and securities. But Pennsylvania was not the worst of its overburdened neighbors. New York and New Jersey ranked second and third, respectively, with Ohio at number 6 and Maryland at 21st. West Virginia was not ranked in the study, but Pennsylvania did come in at 14th as the most regulated state in the country. So, I mean, Pennsylvania is still very high. I mean, we're still very high on the list. And you know, it's a very, like I said, it's just a very interesting thing to look at. And I think you should question this. I mean, as a business owner, I mean, as a banker, I think you should take a look at this and say, if small business is not growing in your state, if general business is not growing in your state, you need to start looking at and thinking about this regulatory burden. And one of the things I've said for years is that one of the problems is, you know, we've had regulation, you know, for decades and decades. You know, you're going back, you know, we got 100 years of regulation, and a lot of times, unfortunately, what happens is regulations. It's like stacking books on top of each other, and regulation gets old, it gets out of date, it gets irrelevant. And but the thing is that regulation, it never comes off the books. It never comes off the stack. It just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And so as a result, like somewhere along the line, you have to start. You have to have probably committees. You have to have groups that basically go in and need to start looking at this regulation and basically saying, hey, what red tape can we get rid of here? What can we take? What can we cut from the equation that's going to make it easier? Because right now, overall in the U.S., I mean, I don't see a wonderful climate for small businesses. It is very difficult to start a small business. It's very difficult to get the funding for a small business. It's definitely difficult to get things off the ground. Depending on what state you're in, it can be a very complicated process. And a lot of states, it's as easy as, hey, you go to an attorney. You form maybe an LLC or something like that, and then you register with the state and kind of off you go. But other states are they're more complicated. Sometimes, a lot of times, you need to get a business license, you need to get a permit or something to operate the business. There's other hoops and local restrictions that you got to run through. But I just want people to start thinking about this and thinking about it in a real way. Like, what can we do to reduce the regulatory burden? What can we do to make it easier for small businesses? Because small businesses become big businesses, and big businesses, obviously employ a lot of people, drive a lot of growth, but we need that small business engine. We have to have it. It's critical for our economy. We need small businesses to start and grow. And that's how things get built. Look at the four major banks. Look at Citibank. Look at JP Morgan. Look at Wells Fargo. Look at Bank of America. They all started as small banks. All started as small banks in certain areas, and then they grew from there. So you gotta have this. So it's just, like I said, just something to think about. Take a look. I would take a look at this map and start asking yourself some questions. How regulated is the state that I'm in? If you're not very heavily regulated, hey, that's great. Woohoo. But if you are in a state that's heavily regulated, maybe you should go to your state Department of Banking, and maybe you should go to some of your state regulators and auditors and some of your representatives, state senators, the governor, and basically start saying, hey, if we're sitting here and we're in Illinois and we're trying to do business and there's 274,000 regulations on the books, maybe we could knock some of those off and make it a little easier for us to do business, that kind of thing. So, but anyway, okay, if you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that always helps the channel. Please remember, we are on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. Please make sure to leave your comments down below, as I always love getting back to everybody. And check out thebankernextdoor.com, and I will see everybody again real soon. Thanks a lot.